Let's get right into it. Some things in space do not need to show themselves clearly to send a chill down your spine. Number 10. The knocking on the hull. In 2003, aboard Shenzhou, 5 Yang Liwei became the first Chinese astronaut to travel into space. Alone in orbit, he found himself in the kind of silence very few people could ever imagine. No wind, no voices, just the sound of the spacecraft's systems running and his own breathing. Then right in the middle of that stillness, he heard a sound that should not have existed. Knock. A dry, metallic sound, clear and distinct, coming from outside the hull. He froze. A few seconds passed, and then it came again. And then once more. Slow, uneven, almost rhythmic, as if something out there was checking to see whether anyone inside was still awake. That is what makes the story more unsettling than an ordinary noise, because orbit is not exactly the kind of place where you expect to hear a knock at the door. According to Xinhua, after he returned, engineers leaned toward the idea that pressure changes may have caused the spacecraft's structure to flex and produce the sound. That makes sense. The problem is a knock from outside never feels like just mechanics. It feels like something out there knows you are inside. Number 9. The swarm of glowing specks in the STS-75 tether incident. In 1996, the Space Shuttle Columbia carried an experiment that was both elegant and unsettling, deploying a tether stretching for miles to interact with Earth's magnetic field and generate electricity. At first, it looked like a flawless display of engineering. The thin line extended into orbit, suspended against the black backdrop of space, beautiful in that particular way that starts to feel less comforting the longer you look at it. Then something went wrong. An electrical arc flashed. The material began to burn, and the tether finally snapped, drifting away from the shuttle, as if the darkness out there had decided to keep it. The cameras kept rolling. That was when the round, glowing specks began to appear across the frame. Not one or two, but a whole cluster gliding silently through the dark. They shimmered, moved slowly, and carried themselves with a calm that felt almost indifferent. Nothing about the way they appeared made the scene any easier to shake off. NASA leaned toward a simpler explanation: tiny particles near the lens reflecting sunlight. That makes sense. The problem is, after watching a tether light up and break apart in orbit, logic always arrives a little later than instinct. And the first instinct here is hard to ignore. Something out there is drifting past. Number 8. The flashes behind closed eyes. Not everything frightening in space has to appear outside the window. Sometimes it happens right inside your head. During the Apollo missions, some astronauts began reporting bursts of light even with their eyes closed. Not cabin lights. Not reflections off the control panels. Just white and blue flashes, sometimes like a thin streak cutting across the darkness behind their eyelids, appearing and disappearing so quickly that they somehow became even harder to ignore. What makes this phenomenon so unsettling is that it was not the kind of illusion you can casually brush aside. NASA studied it early on and concluded that high-energy particles in space could pass through the body, interact with the visual system, and create flashes the astronauts were genuinely seeing. That is perfectly scientific. The problem is, in this case, science does not make it feel any better. Because when you are floating inside a spacecraft, closing your eyes for a few minutes of rest, and the darkness behind your eyelids suddenly lights up, your first reaction is not the comfort of explanation. It is the feeling that the universe has just reached straight into your nervous system in the quietest possible way, and in a way that is impossible to ignore. Number 7. The mysterious methane on Mars. Mars has long had a way of making people stare at it a little longer than necessary. Its surface is red, dry, cold, and almost motionless, and because of that, it has always felt like a place that has been silent for far too long. Then, curiosity began detecting spikes of methane in Gale Crater. Not constantly, not clearly enough to settle the story, just brief appearances enough to turn a planet that seemed to be nothing but rock and dust into a place where something might still be quietly happening beneath the surface. On Earth, methane can come from geological activity. It can also be linked to life. NASA has made it clear that the source of methane on Mars still has not been definitively identified, and that is the part that tends to linger in people's minds longer than usual. It sounds entirely scientific, The problem is, science does not always make a planet feel more comforting. Because when a world that appears to have been dead for ages occasionally exhales a signal like that, one thought shows up almost immediately beneath that red soil: something may still refuse to stay still. And that is not exactly the kind of news that helps anyone sleep better. Number 6. Fast radio bursts. The radio flashes from deep space. No one sees them with the naked eye. There are no strange lights outside the window, no knocking on the hull. Just instruments listening to the sky suddenly catch a radio signal that erupts with incredible force, lasts less than the blink of an eye, and disappears. It happens so quickly that it almost feels like a slightly cruel joke from the universe, long enough to be detected, far too brief to be understood right away. And that is exactly why fast radio bursts have become one of the most unsettling phenomena in the most scientific way possible. What makes them so haunting is not what they look like, but how they behave. These flashes come from incredibly far away, carry enormous amounts of energy, and then cut out before humanity can even ask a second question. NASA has said that at least one FRB in our galaxy has been linked to a magnetar, a type of neutron star with an extremely powerful magnetic field. That makes sense. The problem is, one explanation for one case does not make the rest of them feel much less mysterious. Out there are still other flashes lighting up from deep space, as if the universe occasionally turns on a microphone and cuts it off just before it finishes speaking. Number 5. The mysterious light trailing Apollo 11. Some stories do not emerge from accidents or failures. They show up right in the middle of history, at its most beautiful. In 1969, during humanity's first journey to the moon, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were said to have seen a strange light suspended in space. It did not flash once and disappear like a sunlit piece of metal. It stayed there long enough to become unsettling, keeping just enough distance to remain unnamed, but not enough to be ignored. The light was described as moving alongside the spacecraft in silence, appearing outside the cabin during the most famous voyage in human history, a mission that should have been filled with nothing but calculations, control panels, and absolute concentration. One explanation often mentioned is the S4B stage, or a piece of material reflecting sunlight. That makes sense. The problem is, what makes sense does not always make an image feel any less disturbing. Because if something bright was quietly following the most historic flight humanity had ever made, then, whether it was debris or not, the first feeling would have been the same. Something out there had decided to come along for the ride. Number 4. Tabby's star. The star that dimmed the wrong way. Normally, a star thousands of light years away is not the kind of thing that makes anyone uneasy. It is simply there, brightening, fading, and continuing to exist with the calm indifference of the universe. But Tabby's star behaved in a way that made astronomers go back over the data more times than they probably wanted to. Its brightness dropped in ways that were strange, irregular, and messy, lasting long enough for everyone to realize this was not the kind of variation they were used to seeing. A star is not supposed to behave as if it is trying to hide something. Once the data drew attention, the theories started piling up, from dust and debris to the most famous idea of all, some kind of alien megastructure blocking the star's light. It sounds like exactly the kind of theory most scientists would rather not bring up in a Monday morning meeting. Later, analyses leaned more toward the dust explanation. That makes sense. The problem is, what makes sense does not erase the impression Tabby's star leaves behind, because when a star thousands of light years away suddenly dims in a way no one expected, the feeling is still unmistakable. Something out there is passing in front of it, and so far we have only seen its shadow. Number 3. Planet 9. The planet that may be hiding at the edge of the solar system. People have grown used to the idea that our own cosmic backyard has probably been counted and cataloged by now. It is the kind of order that makes it easy to believe the really big surprises must be waiting in distant galaxies, not lurking just beyond the edge of our own system. Then Planet 9 arrived as an unsettling possibility. What if something enormous is still out there and we just have not seen it yet? Astronomers did not come up with this idea because they wanted extra drama. They looked at the unusual orbits of several distant objects beyond Neptune and saw signs that a large planet might be tugging them off course through gravity. NASA and Caltech have both made it clear that Planet 9 is still only a hypothesis and has not been directly observed. That is cautious, and it should be. The problem is a hypothesis like this is enough to make everything feel a little less settled on its own. Because if at the dark outer edge of the solar system a planet several times more massive than Earth is quietly circling the Sun, the most unsettling part is not that it is there. It may have been there the entire time. Number 2. The wow signal. 72 seconds that gave humanity chills. Some mysteries do not appear as objects or lights. They arrive as a signal brief and strange enough to make people wish they had heard it wrong. In 1977, the Big Ear radio telescope picked up an unusually strong signal lasting 72 seconds from the direction of Sagittarius. When astronomer Jerry Amon reviewed the data, he circled the string of characters showing the signal's intensity and wrote one word beside it: wow. That was all it took for one of the most famous mysteries in the universe to begin. What makes this signal linger is how simple it is. It was strong enough to rise above the background noise, strange enough to stand apart from anything people were used to seeing, and then it vanished before anyone could ask a second question. SETI has acknowledged it as an unusual signal, but years later it never returned in a way clear enough to pin down its origin. There are theories that it was only a rare natural phenomenon. That makes sense. The problem is a signal that lasts 72 seconds and then goes silent has a way of keeping people awake. Because in a universe this vast and this quiet, sometimes the most unsettling thing is knowing that something called out once and we still do not know who was on the other end. Number 1. Oumuamua, the first interstellar visitor we never had time to fully understand. Some mysteries do not stay long enough for humanity to get a clear look. They pass through leave behind a few data points and a few arguments and disappear before anyone can decide what they just saw. In 2017, astronomers detected an object whose trajectory showed that it did not come from within our solar system. It was named Oumuamua, a true interstellar visitor, passing through our cosmic neighborhood and continuing on its way. What made Oumuamua unforgettable was not just the fact that it came from somewhere else. Its shape seemed unusual, its brightness changed in strange ways, and its motion sparked more debate than an ordinary chunk of space rock should have. NASA confirmed that this was the first known interstellar object to pass through the solar system. That is already a big enough deal on its own. The problem is, the more closely people looked at what it was doing, the harder it became to fit neatly into any one category. There were theories involving outgassing ice and an unusual shape. All of them sounded reasonable, but one detail lingered long after that. Something from another star system passed through here, and we only managed to catch sight of it as it was leaving. No knock, no stop. Just a brief visit enough to remind us that out there, we are not always the first ones doing the observing. Whatever the truth is, one thing still lingers: space does not need to explain itself to feel unsettling. Sometimes a sound, a signal, or a passing shadow is already enough. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this journey into some of the strangest mysteries beyond Earth, make sure to subscribe and stick around for the next one. We've got plenty more coming. See you in the next video.